Helo pawb a chroeso I Sgwrs Chwa o Aer Cymreig gan CARN. Good evening everyone and thank you for joining us for a Breath of Welsh talk number 2. Joining us tonight we've got 3 of the artists that were taking part in the exhibition, or are taking part in the exhibition I should say. And also Peter Lewis, who was one of the co-organisers with myself representing Palis Advisory. So the artists we've got talking tonight, we've got Rebecca Hardy, we've got Racehl Rosen and Hannah Wardle. Now each of them will be talking about their work and about the process getting to the exhibition and stuff in response to the call out very shortly. But first of all, I'd like to just say that this has been a brilliant opportunity for CARN, and this has been a great opportunity to be able to do something internationally, even though we haven't actually been anywhere. We've been all in Carnarvon, but it's been a great platform for us and more opportunities have come from it, and Peter and I will touch on this again later on. But this came from Peter. We were approached by him to put on an exhibition in collaboration with Palis Advisory, who Peter represents, and yeah, we were then offered to be taken a year later sort of thing to be part of this festival in Germany, and this is where we got to this. But Peter's going to say a little bit more about that, if you're okay to do that, Peter.
Yeah, I'll just start by saying that Palis Advisory is a commercial enterprise in Berlin run by a guy called Wolfgang Schnurr, and he's got a real passion for art. And we met in Manchester on a project when he was in Manchester for a while, and he asked me to join Palis Advisory. But there's a part of Palis Advisory which is not commercial, but is devoted to art projects or creative activities. And he asked me to join so he and I could work on projects between the UK and Germany. And just after I joined Palis Advisory, I joined CARN Artists. And then we had an idea. Well, Wolfgang said, why don't we use Welsh artists and do something around St. David's Day in Berlin? And I said, well, great. Then the lockdown happened and nothing was happening anywhere. So it then got moved on to 48 Hours Neukölln, which is a festival in Berlin. And he said, well, okay, let's hang it around the festival in Berlin, and we'll use Welsh artists. But it suddenly occurred to me after I got to know CARN and CARN artists that I said to him, there's no need for us to look any further. I said, there's a wealth of talent of creative artists and contemporary art in CARN with the CARN group, and he agreed. And so it then became a call out for CARN artists to put a proposal together around the theme of air, which was the Neukölln 48 Hours theme for the year. And we were going to go to Berlin. We got funding from Wales Arts International, but Wales Arts International were only funding things that were going to happen online mainly. So we had to deal with several challenges, but the great thing was that we had the physical working in gallery in Carnarvon and the digital presence in Berlin for the Neukölln 48 Hours Festival. And then after that, things snowballed a bit, and Wales in Germany 2021 coincidentally was happening from the Welsh Trade Office in Berlin. And they promoted us through their channels, social media channels. So we had a lot of good marketing, and we had managed to get everything, even though it was a challenge to get things online, but we had a physical exhibition, and now all the work's in the CARN gallery in Carnarvon. So it's continuing, and it'll continue on to Russia for something in mid-September. So that's where we're up to at the moment. So it's quite a long process. It seems to have gone on over a year, but it's great. It's good.
Yeah, and thank you to you and to Wolfgang for bringing that to us and having that opportunity, which has been great for all the artists involved, and not even the artists that have been successful, but the ones that applied as well. I think it was a really good exercise for all those artists to try and think of ways to that's the wrong one, respond to the brief and to the possibilities of the exhibition in that sort of environment.
Yeah.
So I think it's been, I think everyone agrees it was a good process, especially during the mad year and the mad situation that we've had. Felly, cyn dim pellach, da ni'n mynd I ddechrau cael sgyrsiau gyn yr artistiaid. So before any further ado, we're going to start hearing from the artists. Felly, I gychwyn efo, gan fod un o'n artistiaid ni'n gyda brysio ffwr I ochr arall o'r wlad mewn munud. Da ni'n mynd I gychwyn efo Racehl. So we're going to start with Racehl, who has to dash off later on. But Rachel's got 2 pieces in the current exhibition. Felly mae gen Racehl 2 ddarn yn yr Arddangosfa yn CARN. Ond cyn hynna pan oedd o'n galeri oedd o'n 1 darn, ond oedd o'n wastad yn 2 syniad gen Racehl. So Racehl always wanted to put 2 pieces in, even though it was only 1 piece in gallery's exhibition, but there's 2 in the current CARN one. So one's called Vessels, and I'll let Racehl explain them, and the other one's called Airlock, which is a piece that you interact with directly. Felly, heb oedi pellach, without further ado, Racehl.
Hi everyone, thanks. And yeah, in a minute I'm going to see if I can embarrass myself by failing to show my slides. But yeah, I thought I'd just explain a little bit about what the kind of talk I've put together today. So I will talk about the work that's gone in the exhibition, a little bit about the process of how I've arrived at it. And I thought it might be nice to put it in the context of some of my other work and explain that it's part of a bigger way of thinking and relate it to a few other things as well. So yeah, I've got a few little different things to show you. So I'm now, because I'm on an iPad, it's a bit fiddly trying to share my screen. So I'll try. We'll see how we do. I did test it earlier, but it's bound to go wrong now, isn't it? Okay, so let's see what I can do. Okay. So hopefully I'm sharing a screen. Can you all see what is mostly a white slide with just a title on it at the moment?
Not quite got there yet. I think it's still showing your screen at the moment.
Okay.
There we go.
Shall I
It's
try?
there now.
Oh, it's there now. Oh, okay. So it's just a bit of a delay. So
Yeah.
I'll say when I'm changing slides as well, because if it's a bit of a delay again, then obviously let me know. And I can't now see your faces, which is a bit of a shame, but yeah, just jump in at any point if you want to either point something out to do with the slides or ask me a question, and then we can have questions at the end as well if you like. So I'm calling this little micro talk Chasing the Intangible, and that was actually something that really came to me when I was actually writing my proposal for this theme and for this exhibition. And I was trying to encapsulate what it was that had piqued my interest, like what I was like trying to get at. And so this was pretty much written into the proposal, and I found that it's more than just the work for this exhibition, but it's other things as well. And so what I mean by chasing the intangible is I'm often interested in the things that you can't see and the things that are, they're slippery, they're hard to get hold of. And I find myself chasing after them and trying to find ways of expressing them in a way that's very physical. So I'm taking something that's very ethereal, but I'm trying to express it physically. So people who know my work know that yeah, I work with a lot of different materials, and they have quite a strong physical presence. I work with metal and concrete, work on quite a large scale. But in a funny way, I'm still trying to find that thing which is not visible, and I'm often trying to say something about it. So this theme really interested me. And I thought, well, that's like inherently a thing you cannot get hold of. It's something you can't see. So this immediately made me really interested. So this first slide now is of the piece Vessels stroke Diffusion, which is the piece that went into both gallery and is now up in CARN. And this is the end result of a bit of thinking around this quality of air that I was saying about it being non-visible, and it's very elusive, and it's at the same time really, really profound and precious to us. It's the giver of life. If we can't breathe air, then we literally can't live. And that's become so poignant in the last year or two with both the pandemic, but not just the pandemic, also Black Lives Matter and I Can't Breathe. So I really found myself following this line of thinking around life and breath, and the idea that here's this incredible, precious thing that you might want to hold on to, but inherently is a thing that should be free, and we should allow it to move. And there's this sense of paradox in that, and I like paradoxes. So where I got to with this is I wanted to construct something that holds this precious thing, but only briefly, like a breath, and then lets it go again, so that it is both held but released. So definitely this whole sort of idea around breathing just seemed to really fit. So what you're looking at in the picture there are what I call vessels, because they're vessels to hold air, and they're physically about this big, and they're made out of a really light material like an organza, and it's just 2 layers that have been loosely glued and then wire to hold the kind of mouth of the vessel open, and then they're strung using fishing line, and there's about 25-30 of them sort of suspended from the ceiling, and they're so light and so almost translucent that you in certain lights can't see them, but they can also cast shadows. Menna's got some lovely pictures of them casting shadows, and they move in the air, so the air moves through them and it moves them. And I had this sort of little moment as well quite late on in the kind of designing, making, kind of thinking to actually cluster them in the way that the alveoli in our lungs are clustered. They're like little sort of broccoli branches in our lungs, and to sort of cluster them just to subtly reference that, not trying to mimic it, but just to sort of again indicate that they're these almost like organic little vessels that are allowing that breath to come and go. And the last little bit of the puzzle in terms of the design was the choice of colour for the material, where it's a bi-colour material, and you can choose which 2 colours you buy it in. And I opted for a red-blue because it's the colour of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. So, you know, in one way it kind of doesn't matter in terms of just like looking at and enjoying the piece, but there were like little decisions along the way about how I displayed it or what materials I actually used. And I hope that, you know, there's something there in the experience of it being there where people are aware of their own breath and just aware of the air around them. And just like, you know, people when they came to the opening of the exhibition, they sort of seemed to get that, and they kind of went inside the work a little bit as well, which was quite good fun, and kind of like stood in it. So yeah, that's a little bit about how I arrived at that particular piece. And the next slide I've got here is sort of 2 different installations of it, if you like. So that first one was actually as it is at CARN. On the right hand there is actually where it was in gallery, and you can see it's picking up light. So it looked a bit different there. And in CARN it was actually casting shadows. And then on the left is actually a series of pictures and videos I made in my garden, where I wanted to see what happens if it was outside and catching the wind. So I like to play around with the same piece but installed slightly differently in different environments. So it was quite a lot of fun to play with. So that was the piece, I suppose in many ways in my head, that I invested the most thought into. And then I did have a second piece which was a little bit more playful, a little bit less serious, and it was this idea of an airlock. So this is continuing the same theme around the idea of sort of hold and release, if you like, with the sort of vessels and diffusion, you know, the sort of idea of breathing. But this time it's about the physical space in which you are actually in, the physical space you inhabit. And again, pertinent to the last year or so, I decided to create a space that was 2 meters squared, you know, the sort of dimension of social distancing, and create a space where you're aware of that physical boundary, but you could still see beyond it, but you can go into it. And having gone into it, I kind of want to ask questions around, you know, are you inside or are you outside? Because maybe it's like a protective bubble and you're outside of danger. And then there's, well, what's dangerous and what's safe and what is protected and what's actually restricted. And that, as the pandemic has gone on, has become a big thing for people, that sense of restriction. And yeah, that sense of, are you isolated or are you protected? You know, it's all these kind of, again, paradoxes that interest me. So that's just a picture of the installation at CARN. So it's sort of made for that site. And we were blessed a little bit by the fact that the way that CARN is set up at the moment was literally 2 meters wide across the corridor. And you might recognize that's Menna sort of standing in there. So I don't know, maybe Menna could share whatever thoughts came to her mind when she was in it. But it's mostly a bit of fun, and just to kind of reference some of our experiences the last year or so, get people to think about it. So that's the 2 pieces as they are. Maybe it's worth just mentioning that there was definitely a sense of fluidity about how they would be created and made, certainly as it became apparent that we wouldn't be able to take the work to Germany ourselves. And then it was like, can the work be portable? Could it be packaged and sent? And the way I'd conceived, certainly the vessels, was already so lightweight and inherently portable that it could have been sent. The airlock I was not so sure about. And then, of course, it turned out that we would have to actually install here in the UK and do the digital hookup. So I was, in fact, able to have full control over the installation, which is something I'm used to doing. I tend to work end to end on all of my work as installation, it's not just sculpture. I really see my work more as installation. So yeah, there was definitely kind of evolving thinking and a lot of conversation with both Menna and Peter. But fortunate for me, I think that in the end it meant that I could have control over the installation. But it would have presented a different challenge to hand a piece of work over and say, please install it for me. So maybe another time. So I'm going to move on now to some other work that might put things in a little bit more of a context. Because I actually feel that this piece, to me, had a certain continuum from some work that I did last year at Palis Advisory. I know Julie's not with us today, but Julie, who's part of CARN and is the owner and host of Palis Advisory over on Anglesey, which is a fantastic opportunity for artists to do all sorts of site-specific interactions, interventions in the building. And last year, I was one of the artists who took part in that particular set of work. And I was interested in the light that was coming through the windows and the idea that there was an interplay between light and time, this idea that they both have this fleeting quality where it passes. And how would you capture and hold that kind of moment, or that, you know, little fragment of time, that echo, that memory? These are like recurring themes for me. So when I sort of framed that idea of chasing the intangible when I wrote the proposal for the Berlin exhibition, I realised that this is something I've been doing for a long time in lots of different forms. So it'd be nice to reference the work back at Palis Advisory. So that's just one of the views from windows. The actual work that I produced there, on the left, is a photograph I took of light coming through the windows. And what I then did is I printed that to very, very light fabric. And then I hung that piece back in the space so that what you see on the right now is almost like a double exposure or like an after image. And I think it created quite an intriguing effect. And I did this with several windows around the building. And I think what was interesting for me doing this work was that it was a bit of a departure from my norm of much more quite physical materials, or opposite end of the spectrum, only light and shadow. I literally work at those two ends. So it's nice that I've discovered a new way of expressing ideas here, which is using very light fabric. And you can see how that's fed into creating the vessels, because it was that same nearly, barely there kind of material. There's just one more slide there. There's another set of windows where I took several pictures, one in fact in failing light, so the dark blues. And so I actually had two different pictures of the same window, and I've sort of superimposed the hangings to create more of this sort of double exposure idea. And on the right was my favourite window. Another window. Moving on to other work that sort of, again, I think puts a bit of a context on this idea of intangibility. Something I keep coming back to is time, but also scale. And it's the idea of taking time and scale and stretching them or compressing them, taking something that might be tiny and going into it and expanding it, or taking something that's huge and collapsing it down to the human scale. So the picture there is part of an installation that I did for Bangor University, the Pontio Arts Centre, where they have an art science commission every couple of years. And I was lucky enough to get one of them 2 years ago now. And I was working with a chemist, and we were looking at salt crystals. So they were obviously very small. We were looking at them under a microscope with all sorts of interesting bits of basically, yeah, interesting equipment in the engineering department. And I was also filming and photographing the salt crystals as they grew. I actually created a time-lapse film, which we projected on a massive scale in the theatre, so that you could almost like be a tiny thing inside a Petri dish looking at these crystals growing. But we also played around with making big paper crystals, which is something that participants on a kind of open day at the Arts Centre could take part in with me. And we made loads of these sort of much bigger paper crystals. And then we actually installed them going up the stairwell in the Arts Centre. So again, it was like sort of shrinking us down or expanding that up so that you could go into something and be at a completely different scale. And this is on the right, a model I made of one of the types of structures of the crystal that you find, which was made with a very sort of transparent type of plastic. And then just some other sort of comment on scale. So on the left is actually a photograph of some of these salt crystals growing. So this was all part of the work I was doing on that project. And on the right, as a complete contrast, is part of a project I did, sort of temporary site-specific installation up in Scotland, which is actually a constellation of stars. And this is one of the light boxes I created. So one of the stars of the constellation, and you walked between them several hundred meters at a time. And by walking, you followed the path of the constellation. So in that situation, I was taking something enormous and shrinking it down to something that was understandable on a human scale. So this is the micro and the super macro, almost like, you know, the opposite ends of the spectrum. So again, maybe they're not so much intangible, but very hard to understand because we don't live on that scale, and they fascinate me. And then just the last little thing I would sort of paint as part of the context for this is that I have been for a long time fascinated by the passage of time and how that shows itself in materials, but it also shows itself in a less tangible way in us as people, in how we feel, and that's very much to do with memory. So although on the one hand I'm known for my reuse of material, for those that don't know me, I work under the name Scrapyard Queen a lot of the time, and known for my rusty metal and whatever else I find and bodge together and make things out of. But I'm very often which is to do with those sensations of memories lost and found, and in some cases remade, or indeed past lives or future hopes and dreams. And so these are themes that also recur in my work. And this one that you see the picture of there are small droplets of glass that I have heated and melted onto a piece of metal, which in itself is already weathered. And for me, that's a way of expressing, a bit like with the fabric, trying to capture those little fragments and somehow fuse something in there in a kind of attempt to hold a moment in your mind. So I'm trying to find a language to express these very inexpressible things. And just to finish then, the last two slides, these pieces, very, very different pieces, but they are both part of that same sense of making, unmaking, remaking. So on the left, part of a series of work that was done as a residency, but also was in the Eisteddfod on Anglesey a few years ago, and then gave rise to a permanent piece of sculpture outside the Menna Science Park on the island, and reused materials from the site, which became a high-tech innovation centre. It was sort of under the name Continuum, because it was the continuum of technology. And on the right, a piece which is much older, but is still one of my most favourite pieces, which is actually 3 frames of just found wood and also broken pieces of mirror suspended into them. And inspired by the artist Louise Bourgeois, who made a really amazing piece of work called I Do, I Undo, I Redo. I've called this piece I Remember, I Forget, I Re-Remember. And it's that idea that time and memory and that fleetingness, again, how do I express that? And it's the idea of those multiple overlaying viewpoints that I was getting at there. And we installed it above a slightly eccentric kind of wonky chair at Oriel Brandanu down in Chwa. So yeah, that was part of a whole series of work, which was all around sort of memory and sort of the intangible. So yeah, I hope that paints a little bit of a picture of not just one piece of work in isolation, not just responding to a single brief, but how I've fitted that into the fascinations that I already have. And there you go, that's me. And I'll just stop screen sharing. So hopefully that's stopped and you've got my face again now. And yeah, you're very welcome to ask any questions if you like.
Thank you very much, Rachel. That was a really good presentation. Thank you. It's really interesting. For me, that's aware of the background of the work and stuff, but there was elements that we hadn't even had a conversation about that I wasn't aware of. So yeah, diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you, big. So as if anybody's got any questions or comments, they'd like to make any questions or comments, please ask or say now.
Mine's just an observation, really. I don't think it's a question, but I was fascinated to see that the work you presented, the vessels, were so delicate and fragile. And yet that last image that you showed, they look like concrete cast blocks. And I was just,
they are. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's a huge kind of range, isn't it? I mean, it's just an observation of the physicality of an object. And then the delicacy of something and its ethereal quality, whereas the work that in that last slide was just, you know, so dense and physical in its presence, really. Yeah, it's just great.
No, it's a fair observation. I think I interact with the world very viscerally. So whether something is very physical or very much its opposite, I really feel that. And I sometimes describe my work as being sensory or visceral for that reason. So I'm not tied to one material, very much need to find the material to express the idea and the sensation that I experience from it. So yeah.
Yeah.
Cool, thank you. Okay, well, if there's nothing else, we'll move swiftly on to the next one. Diolch yn fawr iawn, Rachel, thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. And I'm definitely going to stay on the talk, but I might be on the move now. So I might turn my video off, but I want to hear your talks. So yeah, we'll just be probably getting in the car and driving.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thanks,
okay,
folks.
So next we've got Hannah Wardle. Next time we're going to Hannah Wardle. So again, Hannah, mae di wneud animeiddiad a ffilm fer o gwahanol elfennau i wneud efo oxygen, a enw dan ydi anadlu'r coed. So Hannah's created little animations and a short film to do with oxygen and breathing in general with trees. And it's called Breathe with Trees.
Yeah.
So I'm going to hand you over to Hannah. Diolch yn fawr, Hannah.
Okay. Great, yeah. So I'm not as prepared as Rachel, I must say. I have no presentation. That was great, Rachel. yeah, so my piece really came about because, so previously to the announcement of the exhibition, somebody called Laurent from Creatmosphere, which is, he does like light installations, he'd asked me to collaborate with him on his project, which is also to do with breathing with trees. And so he's doing these great big whole kind of park size installations, putting floodlights in trees and making them look like they're breathing, which is great. But he wanted me to design, so he'd got these little solar modules, and he wanted me to design some kind of thing to encase them in, to be more of an like a different form of that installation. So I'd already been thinking about that. So then when the topic air came up, I was like, okay, that's interesting. So that kind of gives me a chance to kind of really think through what breathing with trees means. Because so yeah, so like the Neukölln brief was amazing for me just for that reason. It made me think, well, I can explore this idea then, and so that became quite interesting to me. So like, how do we breathe with trees? So just to kind of explore the basic science actually of that exchange and how it flows through us, and how, you know, because we see trees, but really understanding how oxygen gets into us, you know, how that exchange happens is so invisible. We don't fully acknowledge it, I don't think, or how much we need plants and trees to keep the air clean and pure for us. Yeah, and also to take the particles out of the air which viruses attach to. So it is really a good topic for this time. Yeah, so but my response was to do something actually quite, I would say, like almost childish. So I'm just taking the simple elements of oxygen and carbon dioxide, and just showing how those elements kind of cycle through a dance, really. So we breathe in oxygen, and then we breathe out, we breathe in oxygen and we breathe out carbon dioxide, and then the trees are absorbing that. And it's a really beautiful cycle that our lungs look like trees actually in their kind of branchy forms, but we're kind of each producing what each other need. So I was just kind of animating that in a kind of simple way that anybody could understand, because I think people maybe don't bother to think about it sometimes, and even I wasn't quite sure. So yeah, it's like an exploration process. So just the other thing that was an exploration was me animating, because I've never animated before. So I learned a software called Loom, which was really great fun, just on my iPad, drawing with an iPencil. And so you can draw over each sketch, you can draw. So you're really just intuitively drawing the process of breathing. Yeah, and then what else did I want to say? Yeah.
Did you want me to show the video?
I'm not sure. Say again?
Do you want me to show the video, Hannah?
Oh yeah, please do. Yeah.
I'll put that on. You can carry on talking.
Okay, great. I'll wait for it to come up.
Yeah, I might have to wait a minute. It's taking a while.
Hannah, how did you find the process of using the new software?
How did I actually find it? Or
no, how did you, was it easy? Was it difficult?
It was a kind of fun challenge, because I said to Peter, I remember saying, oh yeah, I'll learn animation. And then I was like, okay, so now I have to learn animation. And then, but that was, you know, everything you do like that is a really fun discovery process. So I just looked around and found, amazingly, Loom is such an amazing process, because it's not normal. Animating is quite complicated, but this is literally just drawing over your drawing. And I found it like a really fun learning process for myself. And I would recommend anybody have a go, actually. Yeah. Is it coming? The film?
It is, yeah. So I'll look through it now. Bear with me for 2 seconds.
Yeah. The other thing that I did,
Sorry,
this bit is actually done on, the first part is done on with Autodesk Sketchbook. And so that's photographs I've taken of an oak tree, but kind of, I'd drawn lots of layers, and it was like you're actually just recording your screen, but kind of doing it in a way that tried to look like breathing. And this again, so this is, so the small piece that has branches there, that's laser cut, and it's at different angles. So it's kind of capturing what's in nature anyway, and kind of, I suppose a lot of it, I'm trying to kind of slightly abstract nature in those pieces. Yeah.
Because you know those pieces with the laser cut ones, you work a lot with mirrors, or you have done. So were there mirrors involved in that? But that was part of the mission you wanted to do as well, but it didn't quite happen, did it either?
Yeah, so obviously it had to go, I think originally I had various ideas for the various locations the project was going to be. Yeah, but the mirrors, I think they were previously, that's kind of how I wanted the aesthetic to look. So just the simple silhouettes of trees, but then repeated. So for me, looking at nature, nature's always looking really magical to me. So just the abstract form of it. So I kind of like to see it out of like a recognizable format of a tree, but just into its kind of more abstract element. Here are my really, really wonderfully childish drawings. But also interestingly, so carbon goes into the soil and then it gets passed along the mycelium network. So this is what the green lines there are showing. Yeah, and I suppose, so just narrating my own video, this is, so it's kind of just showing how these elements are kind of always dancing in and out of matter, in and out of our lungs. And the forms of the lungs versus the forms of the trees, it's the same form. And so really, I suppose it means that we're in the same system with the trees, you know, we're from the same physical language. And I have to say that even when I look at oak trees now, I still find it hard to imagine the oxygen actually coming off coming off them. So, you know, for everybody, it's like a challenge to kind of cognize those processes that are already always going on. Yeah. That's Earth in space, unless you didn't guess. So this is something my sister told me, is that oxygen we have on Earth has been being created over, you know, a really long time. And we had to have a lot of plants first before we could have us. You know, to be able to get an oxygenated atmosphere is actually taken a really long evolution to develop that oxygen process. Yeah, I guess, is that me? Any questions?
Great. Yeah, thank you, Hannah. I think, though, I just want to say, even though it is quite simple, and as you say, they're quite childish drawings, there's something quite effective about them, quite narrative about them, so it does sort of give you the information that you need for you to understand it, and I think they're quite effective in that sense.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, and I think they're quite powerful in a way.
Yeah.
So I just if anybody has
Thank you.
anything else they want to comments or any questions.
I've got a question.
Pam?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I thought that was beautiful, the film. I really liked it.
Great.
I was just wondering, you said that you'd use some software called Loom.
Yeah.
Is it an app or is it
It's an app on an iPad. So I don't know what other things it works on, but it's an app on an iPad.
yeah.
And you download it from the App Store, and you can do it with your finger, draw with your finger, but it's a lot easier if you have an Apple Pencil. And
Yeah.
it's like a really intuitive way of animating, because you can see the frame before, so you can kind of draw over your own drawing.
I just recently started using Procreate, so I'm quite interested in different apps that you can use. It's like you've got a different way of working.
Yeah, I think it's like animating, but from a much more intuitive perspective rather than the old school way.
That might have a go.
And it's loads of fun, I have to say. So.
And you mentioned something else as well that sounded interesting. Autodesk Sketchbook. What's that?
I think that's probably like what you mentioned. So that's like it's iPad based, layer based sketching.
Oh, right.
So you can import stuff and then draw. It's got lots of layers. So you can. It's like Photoshop, but if you've used Photoshop, you can build things up. And the interesting thing is you can record your screen. So that the photographic elements is me chopping up photographs, rubbing out parts of them, and then hand animating, literally going like on off on off on off on off on different layers. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. I thought the film was beautiful. I really did.
Thank you.
I like the picture. And it never occurred to me our lungs look like a tree.
Yeah.
It does. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I've seen it around a few times now, the fact that it does, because I think like the world is so complicated that literally there's too many things to understand. But sometimes when you get little bits pointed out to you, you're like, oh, okay.
It's so simple.
Yeah, simple but effective.
Complicated.
I had a question for you, Hannah. So when you set out, because it sounds like you're totally learning how to do this, but when you set out, did you have an idea of what you were trying to make, or were you experimenting and it kind of evolved? Did you see in your mind what you wanted it to be like, the finished product?
I think I specifically wanted to show that element dance thing, and I wanted to do it because at one point it was going to be in a tree, like lights in a tree, so it could have been like green and blue lights and them kind of animating on and off. So kind of, I think the idea is, it was adaptable idea, but it was definitely element dance. It was basically all about the dots and showing the elements basically going on and off and dancing around. Yeah, so that was like the thing that pulled the idea.
Yeah, it was so effective. There was a real continuity through all of the different sort of like themes that you explored. But yeah, I think it's wonderful. I really love it. I can't believe it's your first attempt at animating.
Thank you. Loom is really easy though. Don't be too impressed. Have a go. Yeah.
Fab, thank you very much, Hannah. Diolch yn fawr. Anybody have anything else to say? I'll move on. Diolch. Just moving thing. Okay. So, last but not least, so yn ola mae gennym ni Rebecca F Hardy sydd yn artist aml gyfrwng, dydyn ni, ac efo darn o waith o'r enw Inhale, dwi'n cael trafod o'r ceg fi, Inhale mewn anadlu, Exhale allan anadlu. That's a hard one to say. So we've got, next up we've got Bex or Rebecca F Hardy, who's a multidisciplinary artist, and she's got a piece that's got a lot of elements to it, which is called inhale, I'm not going to say it again, inhale mewn anadlu, exhale allan anadlu. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Bex. Diolch, Bex.
Hi everyone, hello. Menna's going to just show some images while I talk for those who haven't seen online the work yet. But I'm just going to read something quickly, just in case you also haven't been onto the website and read my artist statement. So I'm going to read it in Welsh and then I'll read it in English. Ar gyfer 48 awr Neukölln yn cyflwyniad wal a llawr sy'n gweithio gyda'i gilydd, yn cynrychioli anadlu ac anadlu allan al adroddus, positif a negyddol, I mewn ac allan, tywelwch ac anrhefn yr anadl a'r meddwl. Archwiliad dynyddiau cyffredin domestig wedi cydbwyso a siapiau a ffurfiau wedi torri amherffaith mewn archiwia ymrywol o biws. So Rebecca's work for 48 Hour Neukölln are wall and floor-based sculptures that work collectively, representing repetitive inhale and exhale, positive and negative, in and out, calm and chaos of the breath and the mind, exploring mundane and domestic materials balanced with imperfect cut shapes and forms in various shades of purple. Piws, porffor, trawsnewid, purple transformation. I was really surprised when I got the email that Wolfgang, Peter and Menna had chosen my work for the exhibition and or for the festival, and the work that actually I did exhibit was nothing like the idea I originally had for Berlin. Although there's elements still there regarding being wall-based and floor-based, the materials underlay didn't come in till pretty much about a month prior to exhibiting. And in that process of changing ideas because of the various issues around the COVID and the pandemic, the wall-based kind of clay, placements with clay, then became a vinyl drawing on one of the large window panes in this beautiful building that I was super excited about exhibiting in. And then obviously knowing, and then it was kind of, could we find a German company that could cut out my vinyl drawings and, you know, present it on the window? And obviously then it became, you might have to do this in your house. And then it became, we're going to do it in gallery, which I can't take any credit for. I completely forgot to even consider the fact that I had a space in where I work that was available. So diolch Menna for asking, you know, can we have it there? Because I really think it really came together really brilliantly, and the relationships of the work talking to each other was just, you know, it was really exciting actually to see the work together. But obviously I find it much easier to talk about other people's work than I do about my own. I would say that elements was, because I was also working on a project that I've been working on for nearly a year and a half, nearly 2 years actually. And underlay had been a material that I'd wanted to play around with, and I do use the word play because that, you know, and fundamentally that is what we're doing. Where, you know, you could make it posh and say we're exploring materials, but really artists play, and we are playing to for our own benefits, to be honest, more than anyone else's, just to explore what this material does and how do you convey that message or meaning through your, especially when you're doing installations or sculpture, or for me anyway, that, but it was, yeah, I can't help for that to influence the work for this really, and that whole sort of that experience that we'd all had internally, being captives in our own homes. And I do work with materials. I don't pretty much never work with anything expensive materials. It tends to be quite domestic, mundane, cheap things that you find. It could be, you know, a kid's roll of paper, for example, and you know, the clay that I have there is just the drying clay that you get for model making. And there's this kind of element of touch, obviously, with the clay, and that kind of element of home with the carpet underlay. And yeah, so we became quite a fusion of different materials and ideas that I've been working and playing with for the past couple of years, really. I think this kind of my process and my work changed or started developing again back in 2017. And I think really it is, yeah, I still work in very different ways, but it feels like they're talking to each other now and they're evolving a bit more. And also being courageous to just put two elements, courageous to edit your work down so much that it literally is 3 materials: underlay clay and vinyl, which can be also very daunting when you exhibit your work, but also it's just enjoyable of the materials and forms. Yeah, I don't really know what to say, really. If there's any images, I don't think there is. If there was any images of the CARN exhibit, because I did play, I tend to, example, the work then gets kind of not reproduced, but it does get recycled in the sense of it won't, I tend to not exhibit work the same way again, or I sometimes previously have dismantled something and then I've reused it, or I've changed it slightly and used it again for another sculpture. But with this, I kind of, some elements stayed pretty much the same, but the one that we all laughed and said it either looked like a sleeping bag or a prayer mat or a yoga mat. That one then got thrown over the wall in CARN, and I kind of like that idea of it's kind of like it's not out, it's not in, it's just kind of on the fence. And I like that playment with things. And the vinyl on the wall I pulled down carefully and made my own kind of purple nugget. It's slightly shiny and garish, which I kind of quite like. And yeah, and that became its own physical form, and that got placed on one of the little kind of shelves on the back of the wall. Although I have a few hang-ups with this as well, because the shiny purple, I can't help but thinking of Cadbury's Dairy Milk, and that's not what you want when you're sometimes looking at your work, really. But yeah, I can't help it, I just see chocolate. I have no idea how that is anyway inclined with the theme or the practice, but yeah, I can't get it out of my head now. Shiny packaging. I think when people see my work, I don't think they may not understand the process and the that message behind the work, and I'm quite happy with that. I don't think people need to know. I think it's a very selfish thing. I'm doing it for myself, and then I'm putting it out there, and whether or not people get it, that's fine. I'm more than happy. And that's why I read the context at the beginning, because I think everyone feels like there needs to be some kind of context. But yeah, personally, I'm absolutely thoroughly enjoying this process of playing with materials, seeing where it takes me, and yeah, and there seems to be like a you know, there is a connection between things. And I like the idea of having that negative. So that circle came from the piece that's folded over. And I remember Tuesday evening, and that was the only evening I had to actually try and figure out how I was going to create this piece of work, because I had all these different ideas. And because obviously I was time limited, because I was there working to help them set their exhibition up, but you know, but also I was kind of exhibiting, so it was quite a strange feeling of like I'm at work but I'm also exhibiting. But I love the fact that obviously only me and Menna know that that little bit that's folded over is the negative, the positive, depending which way you want to look at it, of the circle. Yeah, and I'm literally waffling now, so please, someone want to dive in and save me, I'd be much appreciated. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Thank you. Drink.
Oh, a little drink.
Yeah. Yeah, so we had a fun little evening playing about with the underlay in gallery, didn't we, to see what would work. And I think it took to the point where I had to go out, get coffee and leave Bex alone with her work.
Yeah.
To try and figure it out.
Yeah,
So
I mean, in that 30 minutes, it just went, done, click, sorted.
That was the kind of question that I wanted to ask. You covered probably a lot of it now, but I knew, because the next morning when I arrived, Menna said that you'd been there quite late, and you know, it's quite a lengthy process. And I was wondering, when you start arranging these, what decision making is going on there, beside, you know, how these things fit when they're right or successful or working? Is it with other people's work that's referenced, or it's just the work itself?
It's going to sound so cheesy, but it is literally a gut instinct. Yeah. That you just, something just clicks. And for me personally, it might not be for anyone else or the curator or whoever it is, but for me, if it clicks and it works and a gut instinct, that is how I want it. Because I think with my drawing, I'd literally, because I didn't visualize, all I kept on doing was drawing all these different methods or different ways of displaying. And I have to, my process is I've got to be in the space, and I've got to see what else is around me. And I've got to, so I was initially thinking like, okay, I know Racehl wants to hang there. So if I put something on the wall, is it gonna take too much emphasis away from somebody else's piece? And it is like, as much as you try and get instinct of when you're clicking, if you're in a group exhibition, you can't help, especially when you're installing and it's an installation type, you can't help but consider what is around you. And I think if there was an image up on Instagram yesterday, and I think if that negative empty circle had been up on that wall, it would have been too much, and it would have taken away from other people's. And also, what a brilliant, you know, what a happy accident. I'm so glad I didn't put it up, because Sarah got to put her beautiful, you know, cloud image up on the wall, and it was just like, yeah, I was really grateful. Although I love this conversation going on, and I love the fact that the circle is halfway up the wall and on the floor, that I knew it wouldn't work.
Yeah.
It's just, it sounds cheesy, but it is a gut instinct.
Yeah.
It's just, nah.
Well, when it was folded into a kind of quarter with an arc, and then it was next to the circle, I'd look and I think I could reference the fact, I thought that has come out, and I knew that in my head I could see that as a kind of hollow of the physical circle. And then it was reinforced by a piece of clay, which was also circular as well. And then, so there was a kind of moment where I could get into the work. There was a kind of opening access into the work, and kind of work, considering how it had all come about. And it seemed like that it's quite conceptually.
It's it seems to be the process that I'm going down. Whereas before, if you saw my work about 10 years ago, I did a lot of assemblages, and it was using old materials, vintage ephemera, vintage finds, and there was a lot of hidden messages, and there's always this message I'm trying to convey. And I think the message is still very much the same, but it just feels like it's gone from this kind of, that was a very niche type style, and it's gone all sorts of ways, my practice. But for now, it does feel like I've literally cut out everything to purely looking at shapes, forms, and materials.
Yeah.
And using those as a way of conveying my message, which then gets a bit difficult for not everyone, obviously, but just for some who will disagree and go, well, that's not art, or that's not a sculpture, or that's not this. But I'm really thoroughly enjoying. I've always been obsessed also with the relationship of wall-based, floor-based, 2D and 3D. That relationship is also, or that marriage, when you get it right, which I don't always get it right. Which I then might go back and go, I'll just move it a little bit more.
But I mean, what you also said was that you've taken it down, you've distilled it down to some basic elements of 3 things, which is, you know, a huge kind of step for any artist, because it's a massive risk, isn't it? And it's to be able to do it, it's all credit to you. I mean, Alex said something that was interesting last week, a couple of weeks ago, when we had the others, and he said, and it was an artist's quote, really, it's not what you put in, it's what you leave out. And to leave things out is a massive challenge, really, because you kind of think, oh, this needs to go in, doesn't it? And then you think, no, should it? And it's, but I mean, I just think, you know, you've done a great, I mean, it's been a great job to be able to do something like that, to have the confidence to do it, I think, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and it is, and I definitely did not have, I'm just gonna be honest, I did have not a single confidence in the work that I put in for Berlin at all. Like, even now this evening, I was really nervous about talking about it, because I think it was that kind of that process. But I enjoyed elements of it, and the elements of play, and the elements of peeling off the final and creating this Cadbury's lump of little nugget of purple, and placing, I sometimes laugh at myself, and placing that on the wall for it to have a relationship with maybe a brain clay that's over here, and then that relationship with that massive curved long piece of underlay. You know, that triangle. I get excited, but I have no idea where that confidence has come from to reduce everything down to just the 3 materials. It's the same thing with what I did the same process. I loved the underlay so much, and that the underlay came from Mewn Rhwng. I couldn't not be influenced by my other project. And that I've played with that process again in Elysium a couple of weeks ago. So I apologise, I missed last talk. But this time it was orange. So there's colour is a really important aspect of my work as well. And I am faffing again, so I'm going to stop talking, because I don't want to take, because it's 8 o'clock, guys.
I wanted to ask you in which building you had the exhibition in Berlin.
It was this amazing, I think it was a church/community hall, and it just had these, so it was really, really open. It had like this massive glass wall, like an L, and on the side as well. And it had a balcony, and this really open space. And so when I saw those windows, and we were told, well, we might have to exhibit in the windows, or we might have to exhibit outside, I just saw this the most amazing opportunity to challenge myself and make a huge vinyl drawing, and imagine the sun coming in and hitting all those shapes and light, and yeah. So I got rather excited, but in my head also I was thinking, how on earth would I do that? Because I can imagine it, you know, I'd need a cherry picker, I'd need, like, knowing me, I'd probably need a helmet on my head so I don't fall over and hit myself. But yeah, I got really excited at that challenge. So this whole project, I've changed my work about 4 times. But maybe I think maybe that's why I wasn't as confident with the work that I did in the end, because I was so excited and fixated at this idea of making a massive vinyl drawing. So yeah, it was bittersweet, but I'm really, really pleased and really chuffed to be part of the group and exhibiting.
Just to add a little bit about the church, it's Brüdergemein church in Neukölln, and it was founded by the Moravian community who were exiled years ago from a different part of Europe and moved into Germany. It's like a kind of brotherhood of this group, and the church is very plain inside. You wouldn't, you know, you could probably say it's the complete opposite of a Catholic church. I mean, it's the room, the church itself is multifunctional, so all the seats move, and it's like a white cube. Yeah. And the windows at the top, they're all glass windows all the way around at the top. It's a fascinating space, really. And it's more like a gallery when you walk in than you would think it to be a church. So anyway, yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. It is a stunning, stunning space. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's one thing on that note, is one thing that needs to be pointed out is that throughout this whole process of when we were awarded the opportunity to be part of Neukölln Festival to when we decided the artist, then there was so many changes because of the situation that globally that we had to respond to it, and therefore the work changed a lot for all of you guys, I think, throughout the whole process. And then all of a sudden we were in one location, then we were in another location. So there's massive congratulations to all the artists for being so flexible and being so adaptable and creating great work at the end of it. So, okay, well done to you all.
And do the German artists, do they exhibit in CARN, in Carnarvon now?
No, so it was literally we had an exhibition and it was just streamed, and all the information and the context was put on our website. So we've got a website specifically made that was screened during the festival as part of the programme. So that's how it happened. As much as we'd love to have all the exciting German artists over here, that hasn't happened. But maybe there'll be another element, another part to it, because it has just snowballed as a project, doesn't it, Peter? It's just gone from this festival to another one in Cannes, and then there's another piece that's happening in Russia, as Peter touched upon earlier, and there might be something else before the end of the year. We're not sure.
Dwi eisiau deud diolch yn fawr I Peter a Menna. A massive thank you to you both, because and especially Peter, you know, for bringing the festival and the idea to CARN. It's just been great. It really is. And I couldn't help it. I was like constantly on the YouTube watching Julie's sculpture melt away at the back of CARN. And then obviously kind of like clicking on the website, seeing all these different artists and how they're exhibiting. And I can imagine it would have been such a buzz, and it'd be amazing. I think even if we just did a trip out, a little mini art holiday in the future to one of the festival opening nights, would be amazing. I'll start saving now. But yeah, do want to say thank you. Diolch yn fawr iawn I chi ddau. Diolch.
Thank you.
Yeah, but huge thank you to Peter and to Wolfgang for all their work. And if there's no other questions or comments from anyone, no, I'll just like to say thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr iawn for you all for joining, and to Rachel, especially on a drive, bless her.
Yeah.
All right, hello.
Are you there yet?
I can't hear you, but yeah.
I was just saying we're nearly in England, and then we've got to get Scotland.
Okay, well, diolch yn fawr iawn I chi gyd. Thank you all very much. And if you do get a chance, please do pop over to the exhibition before it finishes on the 8th of August. So one more week. Yeah, diolch yn fawr iawn.
Thank you.
Stop now.
Thank you.